This information you are about to hear and perhaps view, these are not necessarily the thoughts or the ideas of Gary C.Clement or the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast. We are in no way, shape, or form affiliated with the parties the story is about or was interviewed for. Parts of this content may not be owned by or the property of the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast, D2 Network Media, or any other company we are affiliated with, and this information is strictly the opinion of those being interviewed. This content is for information purposes only, and although we may make reference to various news stories, we share our own independent beliefs about the content and provide our own opinions. Please enjoy the information. Hi, my name is Gary C. Clement, and welcome to the Gary Clement Radio Show and podcast. Today, we are very excited to have on a guest who has a unique book. She's an author. Her name is Mrs. Joyce Payne. How are you today?
I am great, Gary. How are you?
Wonderful. So first of all, tell us about your life growing up and how this love for reading got you into writing your own books and your career going forward.
Okay, I was born in Virginia, actually, Danville, Virginia, and I lived my life there until I graduated from high school, where I went to Washington, D.C., lived and worked for several years, and lived pretty much worked pretty much as an administrative assistant in a lot of different offices and national organizations. But I returned back to my hometown of Danville, Virginia, after a number of years in DC because I wanted to be, closer to my family. And pretty much I've been in the area for the last maybe 20 or so years.
Okay, great, wonderful. Okay, so you are a author. Tell us about this book that you have, The Lord and the Servant. What's this book about exactly?
Okay, I have actually written a number of different books, and they all come from basically my spiritual journey after I returned back to my hometown and joined the church and was born again. I began to have a number of different experiences as I tried to live a Christian life. And I was just led of God to write about some of those experiences in a number of the books that I've written. The latest book that I have written is called The Lord and the Servant. And that book basically talks about finding your purpose in God. And of course, it does take a while sometimes before people can understand what their purpose is. But basically, I've taken a statement from the book, I think, that explains it best. It says that every person is born with a purpose or mission in life that is preordained by the sovereign God over the universe. Those that become born again Christians can eventually understand their destiny and begin to work with God to become who He ordained them to be when we first start out in life. But at some point during the challenges of life, God may enlighten us with that understanding. And I think that's basically what happened to me as I began to walk as a Christian. I began to understand that there was a purpose that God had for my life, and that I needed to align with His purpose in order to be successful in life. And so the book basically tells part of my story about my trying to find my purpose in life and to be in line with what God's will for me. And it talks about some of my experiences, but it also uses biblical scriptures to try to explain how it is part of the Christian journey. So those that follow the book will be able to see that part of the journey that I have taken is actually what the Bible states that we will do in order to find God's will for our life.
I see. Okay. Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned something about, basically living in Washington, D.C., and I guess you could say being part of a church that did not believe in women to be ministers or be pastors or be in the ministry. Tell us a little bit about that part of your life, please.
Well, actually, that started in Virginia when after leaving Washington, D.C., and having had a business career there, I was led of the Lord to return back to my hometown, and that's actually where I did become a born-again Christian. And becoming a born-again Christian, I had no understanding about the positions of a church. And every church has its own traditions. Some churches believe in women ministers and some do not. So I did find myself in a church where they did not teach that women were to be ministers. Actually, I think when I first began to have some spiritual experiences, someone told me that God was calling me to be a missionary. And I had no understanding of what a missionary was because I'd lived my life pretty much in Washington without being churched. So all of my experiences were actually really new, and I had to find my way into what the will of God was for me. And I found that God was willing to teach me, through reading the Bible and praying and just walking in my daily life. God was willing to show me which way to go. And so I began to do quite a bit of writing. I would write down ideas and thoughts that the Lord gave me, and some of that writing, the writings turned into, um, well, eventually into books.
Okay. And just give us
So
a
this,
list of those books. Tell us what those books are, please.
okay. Well, actually, the name of the first book is entitled "The Black Church Identity Crisis: Pimping the Church." Now, I know that's a very provocative title, but it actually talks about the Black church and its emphasis on money. And even though that book was written way back in 2008, I believe it was, that's the topic that we are actually looking at today. How some of the churches are so involved with raising money until we are not really lining up with the Word of God. The next book was called The Father. And I think that book, it's a good book actually for Black men, but it was a good book for me too because it talks about how God is our Father. And I think in the Black community particularly, we do need good examples of what a good father is. And I had to begin to identify with having a good father because we don't always have the best experience or examples of a good father, but God is a good father. And so when we come to understand who we are as children of God, then we understand that we have the perfect Father. The next book is entitled Silencing the Voice of the Prophet. And that book was written as I began to understand that God was using me in a prophetic office, and I had no way to make my voice be heard in the church because the church did not believe in prophets at that time. That book was written in 2011. The next book was called Elephant in the Room: The Economy and Whose Job It Is to Fix It. This book was written in 2012, and it actually talks about the problems that we were having with the economy. And I'm sure you remember the difficulties that we were having around 2008 when we had an economic crash. Well, this book was written after President Obama became president, and people were still looking for answers, but I think a lot of people believed that the solution was coming through having a Black president. This book is basically saying that that was not the answer. The answer is always in God. And it began to explain that there were things that the Black community needed to do in order to be prosperous. The next book is called Christianity and Ethnicity: Is Christ Concerned About Race? This book began to talk about the fact that we need to understand who we are as a people. And it talks about the Black community, but it also describes the biblical understanding that Jesus went into his own community and began to teach and instruct his own people first before he went out into the general population of the Gentiles. And that book explains that, and you would probably have to read that, but the book explains how it's important for us to teach our own people first. And that is because we need to know who we are as a people. And as we begin to understand that, then it becomes easier to relate to other people or other ethnicities. And of course, the next book is called Greed, Bondage, Corruption, and Abuses: The Story of White Fear, American Turmoil, and How to Overcome It. That was a book that I wrote that where God helped me to understand some of the difficulties that I was having um, as a Black person in America with the financial situations that was a difficulty for me at that time and all through my life actually, and for Black Americans. So God began to show me that we are in a society that is basically, as many people have began to understand, where white supremacy is a problem. So God was showing me actually the way through those problems is through Him, not necessarily with gaining wealth, because there are many people that are rich and still having problems with discrimination and white supremacy. So the answer is always going to be in God. And of course, my last book, The Lord and the Servant. That book actually has, I think, a little bit of something in there for everybody because everybody needs a relationship with God. And regardless of where you are, we can always find ourselves in the Bible where God is speaking to us about our present situation and how we can get to where He wants us to be. So this book basically talks about my journey with the Lord. And it's not basically about me, but it's just using part of my life as an example. And then it also takes the biblical stories that are in the Bible to break them down to show us that God is showing us all through the Bible how to come out of difficult situations and to come into our purpose. And once we come into our purpose, we begin to do service for God and helping other people.
I see. I see. Wonderful. Correct. So what I'm gathering here, actually, it sounds like the majority of your titles deal with the Bible as well as economic situations, or how could you say it? Like a holistic look or whatnot at our lives, just in general. That's basically what I'm gathering from what how you describe your books.
You're absolutely right, because at the beginning of the book, I explained how I was being spiritually led to write down some things about not only my life, but my biblical understanding. And the book went through transitions as I tried to write the story. And eventually, I got to the place where I saw that it was not about me, it was not about a small issue, but it was about life in general. So I do explain that, but basically the book will actually be, I think, enlightening to anybody because it basically talks about how God takes us from the beginning of our faith all the way through to an understanding of what His will is for our life. And so what happened in the book is that actually I had to take a look over the course of my life to see what God was doing. And I didn't just do it from my aspect. I think God gave me an insight into what He was doing in my life. And then I saw the parallel to certain scriptures in the Bible. And so I bring that out in the book. And that's the reason why I believe the book will help a lot of people as well, because they will see through some of the things that I went through, they will see perhaps glimpses of their own life and also an understanding of certain scriptures in the Bible.
Right, right. I see. Okay. You mentioned also about, as you were, I guess, growing up, you were part of the Pentecostal church. Um, are you still Pentecostal, or what's your religious, belief now?
I actually do not believe in being denominational. I believe that God has a way that He wants us to walk. And I don't think any religion can define it because I think religions are basically very restrictive. Um, and we tend to follow man's tradition. But God does not want us to be limited to man's tradition or ideals of church. Um, there is a way that God wants us to walk in. It is not limited to any man's idea of church or religion.
I see. Okay. In today's society, we have a lot of people that would say that our young people are out of control. In your listing of books, I didn't hear any titles that basically are catered to or deal with our youth in our communities. Do you have some ideas to possibly write something, along those lines?
It's not geared to children, but it does, I believe, help children to understand life. And I think that's the biggest problem is that If adults do not understand life, then they cannot teach their children, because we are supposed to guide children in how to grow up and to be successful people. But if we as parents do not understand, then how can we teach our children? But once we understand what life is about, then we are certainly able to help direct children to live the way that they should. And I think what is going on actually right now is that we have lost our foundation. Our foundation actually came from, I would hate to say church per se, because actually before church, it comes from the scriptures, it comes from God. So God gives us moral values that we are supposed to use in the church to teach the children and adults. And it is the foundation for our community, because even our moral values basically guides us into how to make laws. And of course, laws are not always just, but I believe that the Bible gives us a foundation that we should use in establishing righteous laws that will govern the lives of the children and, of course, adults.
Okay, cool. So for people whom are looking to get a copy of not just one of your books, but all of your books, where can they go to find your work?
Well, the majority of my books are online. They can be found through your local bookstore if you'd like to order it from there. They are available through Barnes and Noble and Amazon. I also do have a site on a place on my website that lists all of the books and also gives an email address for where they can get more information. But my website is truthandlifeministries.com. And you do have to write that in small letters with a dash in between each word. So that's truth dash and dash life and ministries.com. So if you go there, you'll be able to get a lot more information about me and about all of the books that I've written, and find out, of course, where you can order them online as well.
I see. Okay, cool. So what's next for you beyond just writing books, having the different, I guess you could say, parts of your life that you've lived out thus far? What's next for you? What do you want to do beyond this?
What do I want to do? Well, actually, I have been somewhat limited in what I want to do because, of course, we just came through the pandemic, which limited a lot of things I wanted to do. Um, but basically, I have on my website that I'm available not only to do book reviews, conferences, um, and teaching. Those are the things that I want to do for the future. So I'm going to expand on the knowledge that God has given me to try to reach back and do basically what the book says, to help other people.
We really do appreciate our guests who participated in this episode, and we hope you learned something that will bless your day and your life. For all who are interested in learning more about the Gary Clement Radio Show podcast, please visit www.amazon.com and order my book, The Gary Clement Radio Show, When Strong Afro-American Men and Women Stand Up. It covers everything about us and features a variety of Afro-American personalities who speak out about the importance of education and literacy in the Black community. Well, we thank you for tuning into our podcast. Please send us your email address so we can contact you when we have new releases and new episodes and new projects as well. You can reach us at gccpresents@yahoo.com. And also, if you're interested in submitting any materials or want to get in touch with us, please do so by simply sending an email to gccpresents@yahoo.com. That's G as in Gary, C as in Charlie, C as in Charlie, presents@yahoo.com. So until next time, do